Our state has some incredible problems. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. I'm here to talk about that with you and talk about the trends that have shaped this state and dragged us in one direction or another. We're not really we're not realizing the dream we had way back in the early 2000s or even around 2008 or 9 or 10. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. Welcome to WowBiz Nebraska. We're going to get it on right now. Do you know what you don't know? My name is Lynn Hbdi. You're watching WowBiz Nebraska, and that's the question that is posed in this particular book. It's an incredible book. I encourage you to kind of find it, check it out. It's called Think Again. It's written by a gentleman named Adam Grant, a very bright guy who is challenging the assumptions that we all have kind of ingrained. We're kind of hardwired for certain things, and like I said before, the assumptions. And it's really quite a book. For instance, I'll just give you a quick one, then we'll move on with the rest of the show. There's a lot to talk about here today on WowBiz Nebraska, but we've heard the whole thing about frogs boiling in hot water. If they're thrown in the water and then it slowly gets to a boiling point, because it's done so gradually, the frog will let itself boil. That's not true. That's not true. That's covered in this particular book, and it's a great example of the things that we kind of just assume all the time. And this is very applicable to business revitalization, business transformation, which is kind of what we're going through here in the state of Nebraska, as well as civic development and how that should all unfold and how it should succeed. But we often don't really know what we think we know. And I encourage you to check out Adam Grant's book and talk with me about it some other time. Now, I'm going to chat with you today about the Great Resignation. I'm sure you've heard this phrase by now. It's been all over the press for the last, maybe year, half a year at the very least. Lots and lots of employees are resigning on their own. They're just quitting their jobs. Some of them are on unemployment, some are not, but they are leaving the workforce. A lot of them, by the way, we've learned are a little bit older, so they're retiring early, but there's a lot of them that are still very much what we would call working age, and they're doing nothing. And they chose to walk away from a reasonable position working for any individual company. I want to talk with you today about that. A gentleman in Colorado called me a few months back, and he said, Lynn, I want you to write something that will inspire the workforce to go back to work. And I haven't done anything about it, but now I'm going to talk to you about Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist. He was born in 1901. He survived Auschwitz for 3 years during World War II and found a way in the midst of all that suffering and just that horrible situation to find pleasure and a sense of presence and a sense of peace, I guess, internally, while everybody else was really, really struggling emotionally, of course, as well as physically. I'm going to talk to you about that. By the way, one of his books inspired me years ago, and again, in a business context. The name of that book is The Will to Meaning. The Will to Meaning. He has another book called Man's Search for Meaning. Now, you know where I'm going with this, right? These people, and I'm generalizing, of course. There got to be many exceptions to this comment that I'm going to make right now, this assertion. But these people are not they have an existential vacuum, all right? They aren't finding meaning in their work. They're not finding meaning in their profession or their industry or their particular job role or whatever. They're struggling with boredom, among other things, anxiety, depression. 1 out of 5 men in their 20s, 1 out of 5 has thought seriously about suicide. In fact, I'm going to give you another statistic along those lines. Every 40 seconds, here it is, every 40 seconds someone dies from suicide. According to these statistics, work stress, such as long hours and job strain, is a leading cause of suicide among Americans. So here we are. We're 2 years into the pandemic and heading into the 3rd year, and we're wondering what's going on inside. Now, these people that I've discussed with you just briefly are struggling with depression and anxiety. They have what would be called mental illness. Now, if you own a company or you're the boss, you're the CEO, and you're responsible for these people and so on, this is going to cut to the quick. All right? You're going to be asking yourself right now as I'm visiting, what could we have done to offset that, to alleviate that? Do we need to have some insurance perks or something like that we can get these people with some help before things go off the deep end and so on? They're thinking along those lines, as you might expect. What is really going on? What's the nub of the whole issue? If you could get these folks, not all young, by the way, they spread throughout the entire workforce, to admit to you what's really happening. And why would they take such a drastic move and walk away from a salary and a paycheck and so on and so forth? And here's the answer. Again, it's a generalization, of course, but basically there is tension between what you have accomplished and what you feel you should be accomplishing. My teacher back at Drake University many years ago would call it cognitive dissonance, but it's the tension between who you think you are, and not such a great self-image, so to speak, and who you think you should be. You're dealing with guilt, and you're dealing with fear of the future. What if things don't go any better? Where am I going to go then? What's going to happen to me? And it's this apprehension about the future. I don't mean to get too psychological here, but it's very relevant to business culture. And by the way, if you're in marketing and sales, this is also very relevant. So here's the kicker. Here's the single worst thing that I'm going to say today to you in the context of this. Your fears, and I'm quoting right now from Mr. Frankl, meaning your fears make what you fear happen, and your forced intention makes what you wish for impossible. Let me say that again. This is the nub of the tension that's forcing people to leave. This is really an important thing to think about if you're in HR, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Your fears make what you fear happen, and your forced intention, I've got to do better, I've got to excel, I've got to get a promotion, I've got to get a salary, I've got to be this, I've got to be that. Your forced intention makes what you wish for impossible. Impossible. It's a fascinating idea, right, that probably a lot of people can relate to. Now, what he would say if he were here right now is that meaning comes from a wider view, more awareness of nature, culture, or love. A wider view. Get a broader picture. A lot of people get really forced down into real simple job definitions, job descriptions, how much money's coming in, how much is going out. It doesn't add up. And so they begin to get really depressed and roiling inside psychologically. So anyway, we're talking about Viktor Frankl, and we're talking about the importance of meaning. Now, years ago, you've heard of self-imaging or personal branding, and I came up with a brand for myself. I don't know where it came from, but anyway, this phrase, the entrepreneur of meaning. This was a phrase that caught my attention, this idea, and so I kind of wore that jacket for a long time, the entrepreneur of meaning. But I have to tell you, if you have an entrepreneurial perspective on business and let's say life, you see opportunity, you see possibility. If you're around people that are, you're working with or consulting with or whatever, they pick up on that, and sometimes it can really lift them out of the doldrums, and that's a very important thing. It also, when I say meaning, I'm talking now, for instance, not just about a person's self-image or a worker's attitude, but also about a brand. Right? Many companies right now cannot differentiate themselves from anybody else. They're essentially selling the same thing at about the same price. People are shopping the web and trying to shop them, and all they feel is profit pressure, and they're just not sure how to stand out. Right? Michael Porter told us at Harvard University, he said, the key is you got to be unique. You have to be unique. So this leads us to understand, well, what does the brand really say about your company? Right? I've had this discussion many times. And what it leads us to is this discussion about what is the true meaning of the brand. When you consume a product, I don't care how mundane it is, drugstore, you pick it up at the grocery store, any product at all. There has to be meaning associated with utilizing the product. There's an experience connected with it. Could be knowledge, could be attracts other people, could be some form of self-esteem, etc. But talking about meaning as it relates to a product or a service, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, and I enjoy doing that greatly. Also, your culture. I'll never forget, several years ago, I was at a luncheon with a lot of people here and a couple guys I knew, and this guy came over to me and he gave me a little pocket notebook, that he had right inside of his breast pocket. And he said, "Lynn, you would like this. Check this out." He says, "Our whole company now has a culture, and it's all distilled down into this little thing right here. So whenever we find ourselves in some kind of stress or don't know what to do, or should I lie about the product? Should I help that guy over there even though he's not in my department?" It's that, all this kind of stuff. The values are all right here. He says, "I think you'd really enjoy, checking it out. I wanted to give that to you." I said, this is the beginning of something really big. We talk about value, right? Or talk about meaning. If your company hasn't codified, shall we say, the values that distill what you really believe in and how you work together, because that can vary greatly, usually driven by the CEO or the boss in the company, but nevertheless, how you have meetings, right? How you work together on a project. And when you say, "Hey, I got to get back to my other stuff," the guy says, "Hey, I'm not done here." What's the right thing to do under those circumstances? This little idea, this written out value pamphlet, shall we say, really, really important. And I would suggest that you think about doing just exactly that. So we're talking about personal meaning in your career. We're talking about the meaning beneath your brand and the experience of using your product or service. And we're talking about your culture, how to recruit, how to attract people to your business, and the feeling, notice I didn't say logic, the feeling that they have that they'll fit in here and actually become a better person, shall I say, a better worker, more professional and so on, but also a better person as a result of working collaboratively with the employees in your company. Now, a lot of this comes from a portion of my brain, the right hemisphere of the brain. We've all heard left and right and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk to you real briefly about this because meaning is associated with emotions and intuition. Obviously, again, that would be the right hemisphere of the brain. Now, years ago, I stumbled across a very nice woman who had an HR background named Judy Storr, very sharp lady, and we got acquainted. And it occurred to me as we were visiting about our theories about how HR and or marketing, which were the areas that we were working in at that time in our careers, and I said, it just occurred to me that both you and I and both HR and marketing have to do with people, our insight, into people and their psychology and what drives them, motivates them to do things and so on. I said, Judy, you and I, the HR people and the marketing people really need to team up. They're really actually deeply connected. And maybe we should be selling products and services to the HR people to help them differentiate their culture. She said, that's a cool idea. That's a cool idea. I really like the idea of bridging the gap between two departments. Normally they don't interact at all, marketing and HR. But when we come back from the break, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the right hemisphere of the brain and why it's so important to HR professionals, why it's so important to marketing, advertising, and sales professionals. And only recently, I have to tell you, maybe 19 years later or something like that, I actually read an article about how HR and marketing people are collaborating, exchanging ideas, and actually working closely together for the very first time. And so it's really a fascinating thing, and I appreciate you hanging out. We'll get back to that in a minute. My name is Hbdi Rocker. You are watching WowBiz Nebraska, and this show is being brought to you by a new organization. You may have heard a little bit about it by now. It's called Newbraska, Newbraska, newbraska.com. You're going to find this organization interesting. It was inspired by young people here in the state who said we need more newness, more innovation, more cutting-edge thinking, forward thinking. We're mired in tradition and conventionality and so on and so forth. And I picked up, of course, on their frustration in that way and said, what if we changed the first syllable of the word Nebraska and came up with something called Newbraska? Now, What is it and why does it exist? Well, we'll find out here, but I'm going to tell you what the primary consideration is, because I think you'll find it interesting. It's actually, it's applicable to many, many companies. There are 45,000 companies in Nebraska, and I would think most of them would find this relevant, especially as we kind of wind down on the back end, hopefully, of this quarantine situation, but even without that. Now, what Nebraska offers, this is a tribe now, a tribe of thought leaders, knowledge workers, consultants, coaches, trainers, mentors. These are the kinds of people, strategic planners in many cases. All right. Now, a lot of companies don't have a plan, right? They've kind of thrown the plan out the window because of the turbulence and the disturbance in the marketplace recently. So I'm going to share very briefly here, if I can just think off the top of my head, these coaches and consultants work first and foremost on strategy. Nearly every business owner in the state is wondering, do we have the right strategy? Is going back to what we were doing in 2019 and before, is that really the best strategy right now? I don't know. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a different business model, right? Maybe there's some other way to create value and generate profit and make the employees happy, et cetera, et cetera. So strategy, key issue, right? Key issue. Now, here's another one. Employee development and management, in particular, management development. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. Also, thinking about innovation. Of course, that goes right along with Nebraska, as you might imagine. And all of these things kind of add up to productivity, profitability, new revenue, obviously, and serving your existing customers in a better way. Now, this takes me in another direction. I want to share with you, you know this, that people are shopping different vendors, they're going to different companies. I'm going to buy from him, he's got a better price. We've seen all this before in all categories. So having brand loyalty, I mean, if you give up an existing core customer and they walk away, it's a big deal, as I'm sure you know. It'll lose a lot of money over the long term. So I just want to emphasize what we're doing with Nebraska. What's happening there is they've discovered that they can create community, kind of prepackage a sense of community, have your customers stick with you. They all come onto Nebraska. You bring them all onto Nebraska, utilize the technological features that are built into the Nebraska system or network, if you will, and make it easy to communicate with your customers right on the Nebraska digital platform. Very interesting, an easy way to build in loyalty, make sure you don't lose your customers while you're trying to get over here and get some new customers. So keep that in mind. Nebraska is about community building, it's about consulting, coaching, strategy, innovating, developing new products and services. Very interesting organization, and by the way, it's very affordable. So keep that in mind. Nebraska, it's nebraska.com. Check them out. I think you'll be pleased to see this brand new ecosystem here in the state of Nebraska, serving every community in the state of Nebraska. All right. Thanks again for watching right here on WowBiz Nebraska. My name is Lynn Hinderrocker. I was talking a little bit earlier before the break about this lady named Judy Storr. And we were talking about what marketing and HR have in common and the need to understand people. And of course, that led us to the portions of the brain that allow us to empathize and maybe allow us to be imaginative and maybe emotional and all those kinds of qualities that you don't really see in many, many business professionals. That's obviously not the way things unfold in most businesses. As a matter of fact, what we'll talk about here is I'm going to introduce you to the Hermann Brain Dominance Instrument, Hbdi. Now, I came across them over 25 years ago. This is a couple brilliant men back in the 60s and 70s, and they discovered, one of them was a brain physiologist, by the way, Roger Sperry, and they discovered that at a certain level in the brain works in 4 different quadrants, not just left brain, right brain, which most of us have heard about, left brain being kind of logical, analytical, right brain being more imaginative and emotional and so on. We all heard that. But these two gentlemen figured out that it's not 2 hemispheres, it's really 4 quadrants that are quite different from each other insofar as what the neurons in that particular area of your brain do. Very interesting. So I'll explain it to you really briefly and tell you the problem and the opportunity that we have. So thinking now, for instance, I'm going to use a square divided into 4 quadrants. That's pretty easy to think about as a symbol of the brain. On the right-hand side of this square, in the lower right-hand side, is the green, they're all color-coded area, where salespeople, these are relational people that kind of operate in that portion of the brain. They're really good with people, and they get along, and they can finish your sentences before you've completed your sentence and so on. They're really tuned in to other people, and they make great salespeople. When we flip over to the left hemisphere of the brain, there's 2 quadrants there, as you might imagine. The green quadrant in the kind of the lower left portion of this square that I'm trying to describe to you are process people, middle management types. These are the people that operate, they're focused on the details of the process. They're project managers, is what they're really excellent at, and just staying with the process. They don't worry really that much about the end goal or the origin of the project, whatever it is. They're not asking strategic questions. They just want to make sure that they guide a project through their department. And then finally, in the upper left-hand quadrant, actually it's not finally, I guess, but then would be the blue quadrants. I'm trying to define these with color codes, of course. And these people are either financial people or technical people. They're really good into fixing the copier, fixing your computer for you, knowing how to handle your accounting and tax calculations, etc. Those are the kind of people that revel in that kind of work. Now, so we've had the right brain a little bit with our salespeople, but let's go back to the upper right quadrant. There we have the yellow brains. All right, there we have the yellow brains. Now the yellow brains, frankly, because they're so different from all the other quadrants, the 3 ones I just mentioned to you, that they have a difficult time in corporate environments. In fact, corporations will often say, hey, you're not really a fit here. Because they disdain conformity. They're imaginative, they're experimental, they're spontaneous, they have big ideas, they act on them quickly rather than calculatedly and having 16 meetings. They're entrepreneurs. But what's really interesting about the yellow brain is that they have the big picture. They love to talk strategy and trends and how the world is changing and how we could fit in and change our product and fit right into that trend. It'd be really great. Right. So those are the yellow brains. Now, this lady, Judy Storr, and I, that I mentioned earlier to you, she's the HR gal. And of course, I was a marketing person at that particular time. So we focused on the fact that we are probably both yellow brains, and we're envisioning improvements that need to be made to the industry. We're envisioning connections that don't currently exist at all right? Marketing people and HR people, So it was a very interesting convergence of thinking, which takes place easily, by the way, when you're a yellow brain. A blue or a green brain dominant person would have said, let me go off and think about that. Okay, I'll get back to you. I'm going to have to think it out, maybe draw it out. I don't know for sure. But both Judy and I were like, that's a fit. That is a fit. 19 years later, right? 19 years later, I actually read about the emergence or the convergence of HR and marketing and the importance of selling. Had to be this way, right? The importance of selling your culture. Because these days, if you're a 25-year-old, 30-year-old, you're doing well, you're just kind of getting started in your careers, there's a lot of companies that would love to have you and your technical insight and background and knowledge and whatever. And again, I'm generalizing, but they would love to have you inside their culture, but they don't know how to sell their culture. There's no difference from them and the other big company just down the street. We're really good guys. We're doing well. We'd love to have you. There's no clear-cut brand meaning, right? Because the yellow brains in that company have not gotten together and come up with a compelling, we'll call it value proposition or brand image, brand persona. Most importantly, brand experience. So here we are, about 70% of the whole show this morning has been about the Great Resignation, how to sell to employees, how to attract, magnetize employees. So just to wrap up this program, I think please remember the importance right now, this pivotal time in our history, in the cycle of our economy and so on, the emergence and the value of creating meaning. Creating meaning. Think deeply about it. It may require a motivational coach or somebody like that to kind of be on staff in many of these companies, because they really don't know what to say. They're paying them an X amount of dollars. It seems reasonable to them that they would work hard, and they're walking away from these cultures, walking away from these jobs. Very important that we look inside the head, and most importantly, inside the heart of these companies right now during this entire cycle. We're trying to figure out what's going to go on, who's going to staff these companies, why these companies cannot get people to go to work for them. It's a huge issue. And those of you who are yellow brain thinkers in particular, we need your strategic view, we need the big picture, and we need to figure out how to create meaning for these people as well as new meaning for your customers. Thank you so much for watching WowBiz Nebraska today. By the way, the next time we get together, you'll see Bruce Aaron here, my longtime comrade on WowBiz Nebraska. He'll be joining us soon, and we'll get into a dialogue, and I'm sure you'll find it most interesting. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.